We're at the track today with the UK's very own Mr. Cagiva. Guy Hayden has a massive collection of these Italian machines and he's been cool enough to join us at the track today with some of his steeds. In this video we're going to focus purely on the WMX 125 from Cagiva, in particular the 1985 and the 1987 versions. I've drafted in an old pal of mine to give these bikes a test in the form of Tom Grimshaws, who's a current MX2 Pro. He's going to give the bikes a test and give us his point of view from a modern rider's perspective. We're also going to see if the 1985 WMX 125 can stand a test of time, as we're going to put a stopwatch on Tom on that bike, as well as my modern race-tuned YZ125. So stay tuned to the end to see that. Before we unleash Tom though, let me just run through some of the features of the WMX and let you know what the general population thought about this rare Italian specimen back in the day. Despite being somewhat unorthodox and particularly rare, especially in the US, Cagiva's technology did rival that of the Japanese. The Italians knew how to produce a fast motorcycle. After that initial World Championship win in 1985, the WMX 125 went through some big changes. The 1985 version of the WMX 125 was very fast, with a reported output of 37 horsepower. A modern day KTM 125 puts out about 40 HP, just to give you an idea. In 1986, the 125 was tamed back a bit to make the power more usable. The bike was said to have a strong mid-range, but care was needed to keep it in that sweet spot. According to the test riders of the time, the Cagiva was just about as fast as anything in 1986, but it needed a good rider to really get the most out of it. Legend says that the WMX 125 earned almost every GP hole shot in 1986. I wasn't there, so I can't be sure, but I found an article in MXGP magazine that gave me that little gem. As well as the power, the WMX 125 had a few other features that were ahead of its day, such as alloy bars, the general ergonomics and the front forks. The front forks were very unconventional for the time. They featured a separate function design. Compression and rebound were handled by different forks. And this is basically a very early version of what we have today. On paper, the WMX's suspension was the most sophisticated in the world. In reality though, that really wasn't the case. It said that the factory setup for the front forks was completely off compared to the Japanese bikes, especially for the US market. The test tracks that Cagiva were using for development in Italy and Europe were just so vastly different to the typical track in the States that the settings were so wrong. The forks were harsh and unforgiving, and a heavy landing would be wrist busting. The Cagiva was regarded as having the worst suspension of the 1986 field, although the shock was much better than the forks. Nevertheless, many test riders agreed that the Cagiva WMX 125 was a shock and fork away from being a true world dominator. Seat positioning and firmness was also very different for the time. The bike had a much flatter shape across the top and the seat was very firm. That's something that we've come to expect today, but back then it was very odd. You were sat on top of the bike rather than in it, and test riders of the time couldn't get their head around that. So it will be interesting to see what Tom thinks. Finally, let's talk about the brakes. You had a disc up front and a drum at the back, which was quite common for the time. But it said that you needed aftermarket pads to really make the Cagiva stop. So that's how the 1980s reacted to this unique Italian specimen. Let's see how the WMX stands up against the test of time. Take it away, Tom.
These pegs are not nice though. It's different. I've ridden a few Ego bikes and it's always been too soft for me. Like a whoop section over there, and I don't think the bike's made for that.
Yeah, that bike seems fast, that one.
You can feel the difference between the two, definitely. I don't know why they went back. How do my feet look? I don't look like a penguin, do I? But honestly, if you try riding with these pegs, I've got really bad feet anyway on a normal peg.
Okay guys, so we've just finished a day riding these classic Italian stallions. Tom's been out on track all day. You've ridden 3 bikes today, but we're going to talk about mainly the 125. We started on the 1987 WMX 125.
Yeah.
That didn't last too long, did it, Tom?
No, it didn't.
Old bikes, classic bikes is a common thing. We ran into some issues early on, but luckily we had the spare, the 1985 Cagiva WMX 125, which is actually a World Championship winning bike. So Tom, let's just talk about the 1985 then, because that's the bike you spent all day on. Compared to a modern bike, what were your first thoughts?
Well, every time I jump on like the Evo sort of bike, you always feel you're always lowering the bikes because obviously these days the seat are more flat. So I was already automatically lowering the bike, and then also just that how it's just a little bit more flat off the bottom, but then it does pick up. And so they were the 2 main things I felt straight away. Honestly though, there wasn't too much different, like turning and everything else was good, but obviously the suspension was just a little bit too soft for me. But
that was one of the big things back in the day that the testers in the 80s couldn't get their head around, was the suspension on these bikes. Guy Hayden, who actually led into these bikes today, they're not, the forks aren't standard, are they, Guy, straight from the factory as they were. So they're not as bad as they were back in the day, but still not quite right for you. Let's talk about the difference between the 85 and the 87. Between 85 and 86, they tamed back the power on the 125, and it went from, I think, 37 horsepower down to about 34, 35. You noticed that out there, didn't you?
100% straight away. Like even just revving up on the stand, it felt more of a, I don't know why, even though it was older, but it felt more of a modern bike. But when I went out there, just the acceleration was just that little bit more punchiness. Overall, you just felt it straight away. A few corners in, it was the much faster bike, and I'm not too sure why they took that away, because I felt so much more comfortable on riding that.
They also say that, especially on the 86 and later bikes, that the power was like really focused around the mid-range. It was a narrow power band and the mid-range. Did you feel like you really had to ride it hard to keep it in that range?
When I compare, okay, we'll come on to that, but like the modern 125s compared to the older one, I had to really work the gearbox, where normally with 125 you obviously got to work it, but these older sort of bikes, I had to really stay on top of it. Me being a 4-stroke rider, I was already a little bit lazy, but within a few laps I got a little bit of the hang of it, but it caught me out now and again. But you had to really be on top of the gears, going down maybe like 2 or 3 times going into a corner. Yeah,
as I say, like back in the day, they said that it really did take a properly good rider to get the most out of these Cagivas, because like you say, you had to work the gearbox so much. We did do a time attack against, I don't know if you can see it, my modern YZ125 is actually a 2010 bike, but we did update it in 2016, so it's a fast 125. He went back to back on the modern bike and the 1985 Cagiva. Thoughts there?
Obviously done the fast lap on the older bike first, and then felt that went all good, but then I jumped onto the modern, and you realise how fast the bikes have moved on, honestly, and suspension was a lot better. Power delivery was like straight there, and again I had to work it less, like I was saying. Didn't have to work the gears too much. It was such a strong bike, and actually I thought I was quite disappointed with the lap time, because I actually felt a lot faster. But
you was disappointed that you wasn't faster on the...
Yeah, I thought it'd been a lot more faster than I was, because I was going around and the acceleration out the corners and flicking around everywhere. But track's quite hard and slick, so I think that's where it came into benefit of the older bike, because it was more flat. I could hold it on for longer around the flatter corners, where on the modern bike it was just a little bit snappy, sometimes biting, and so I think maybe I lost a little bit there. But overall I was quite surprised how actually not far off the bikes were.
Just going back to the 87 that you rode this morning, a big thing that testers again couldn't get their head around was how flat the seat was. And we were looking this morning when it came out, we were like, well, that's a ball buster, that is. And the seat's fat, and it's meant to be pretty firm as well. And then the 85 rolled out and was like, that's a ball buster.
It's funny how the bikes have gone that way now, you know what I mean? But
that's what we're used to.
Yeah, that's what I was used to. So when I did go into the lower seat, obviously then you immediately felt low into the corners, but higher up in the front end. But not too bad, you could adjust quite quickly.
It's just cool really, isn't it, to ride a piece of motocross history here. The first bikes that won the 125 class against the Japanese. What's your overall thoughts of just riding a piece of motocross history like that?
Yeah, it's great. It's like racing my own 250 yesterday, and then coming here today and just jumping on one of these older bikes straight away. It's it's real eye-opener how things were, you know what I mean? But it's like how tracks have changed, and you realise how tracks have changed because the bikes have got a lot better, and I couldn't imagine riding that around some of the tracks I do now, you know what I mean? So you got your traditional tracks like Farleigh Castle. I love to have a little rip around it on that bike, but
not Matley Basin.
no, I'll try and avoid that. I'll try and avoid that on my own modern bike, never mind those. So it really does show how things have progressed.
Not many people get to ride a bike that's 16 years older than themselves, do they? So
I know.
been a great day down here at the track. Big thanks to Guy Hayden for lending us his steeds for the day. Thanks for watching, guys. If you recognise me or any of the clips in this video, you might have seen some of our work over on my main dirt bike YouTube channel, 999 Laser. That's where you can see our crazy ideas and big projects. So head over there to subscribe if you haven't already. This channel right here though is our second channel, exclusively made for the die-hard two-stroke family. We'll be uploading here multiple times a week, so if you love two-strokes as much as us, make sure you subscribe. It's going to be a fun ride. Welcome to the two-stroke family.